hopefully the recording will work. All right. It's 2 o'clock on a beautiful sunny day in both Boston and West Virginia. So Melanie and I welcome you to this webinar, which I have to say we had an amazing response to people wishing to attend. And for all those who didn't get to come into the meeting room today, we will be posting this recording and the slides and some other materials on our website, and I'll be giving you that address before we conclude. So this is how we're going to conduct the webinar today. We'll have a little introduction. I'll do a review of the research, which we conducted. We didn't conduct the research, we reviewed the research. Melanie will share with you the experiences of the Job Accommodation Network for these many years, and they're just a wonderful, wonderful resource. I can't say enough about. There's our background noise. I got a lot of ambulances going on here. And after each of our presentations, hopefully we'll have a little time for questions, because it's a packed agenda. And I'll look for your questions. Any questions we don't get to, I will answer by email tomorrow. I'll do my best to answer them tomorrow. And ones that I can't answer, I'll ask Melanie to answer. Then we'll see if we have time for some discussion at the end. I hope this is okay, and we're up to 82 people, so we're close to maximum. So we'll proceed then with this webinar. And why are we interested in this? We're interested in this because, well, first of all, accommodations are mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Not all employers, but certain employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities, unless doing so would create an undue hardship. The people we're going to be talking about in terms of the employees who need accommodations, this is what the law says: qualified individuals are those with mental health challenges, behavioral health conditions, psychiatric disabilities, or mental health impairments. We often use the word person in recovery. The reason we use these different terms, for example, Melanie, the Job Accommodation Network, is responding to the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and they prefer to use the word mental health impairment. We tend to use something like mental health challenges or person in recovery, something like that. So we may be flipping back and forth in our language. The important thing that I want to say is that everything we do here at the Center for Psych Rehab is based on the premise that people do recover. That may be a process where they're learning and learning how to manage their difficulties, but we focus on function rather than symptoms. And I think that's true, same is true for the Job Accommodation Network. Our interest is in how people function and what support they need. So an accommodation is any change in the work environment or the way things are customarily done. Accommodations are intended to remove the workplace barriers for individuals with disabilities. What is reasonable versus unreasonable? Unreasonably high costs would be one reason an employer might not be able to accommodate somebody, or if there's significant disruption to the nature of the business. Those are things we try to avoid. So what did we do? We set about to find out, what did the research say? And this is how we went about it. We reviewed and graded all the research that we could find for how scientifically rigorous was it, and did it have meaning to our interests. Then we synthesized the results into one document. We developed a dissemination plan, and we developed information tools. And I'll tell you where to find these things as we go along. Job accommodations for people with other disabilities are associated with higher job retention rates and satisfactory work outcomes. And they may be more obvious. If you have a person with a hearing impairment, their accommodation may be more obvious. A person with a visual limitation may be more obvious. So when you get into the invisible disabilities, this is where I think people need a little more guidance. There was limited knowledge of people with psychiatric disabilities about how to use the ADA and job accommodations. And I'm really looking forward to Melanie talking about some really good examples of set of creative approaches to accommodations. Deciding about disclosure of psychiatric disabilities may interfere with requesting and using job accommodations. So unless people disclose that they have a disability, they don't even know they don't even have to say what it is. What they have to say is what their limitation is and what they need. But they do have to disclose a disability. And sometimes that interferes with what they need. This is the dilemma that lots of people have, and we're going to get more back to that later on. So we screened 60 articles out of 100 documents. How did we decide which ones to keep? It had to be about job accommodations. The people in the studies had to be exclusively or mostly people with psychiatric disabilities. And the design had to be one of these, which I won't read them off to you, but the various kinds of approaches to different research types. After screening the 100, we had 19 left. 4 of the studies examined outcomes, and 15 of the studies described the accommodations and related factors. We also looked at 9 qualitative studies where people are interviewed in depth, and we tried to pull some themes out from that. Findings. There weren't a lot of, control groups kinds of studies. There were a few, but not a lot. So we're left with some questions. But what did we find and what did we learn? There's some evidence that job accommodations are positively associated with staying employed, job satisfaction, satisfactory terminations. That means people are leaving for a good reason, a sense of mastery and well-being, and the opportunity for promotion. What did we learn about employment tenure, length of time that people stayed on the job? And the left side is sort of the researcher's language, and the right side of this slide, we're trying to put it in simple English. So what the results showed us were the more accommodations one had, the longer they stayed on the job. So if they needed 3 accommodations and they got 3 accommodations, they're more likely to stay on the job. Quitting or getting fired had something to do with needing accommodations and not getting them. Not getting the right accommodations or enough accommodation has something to do with more disability leave time and bad experiences in the workplace. So what this slide is basically saying is that if people get the number of accommodations they need and the type of accommodations they need, the success rate is much better. What about cost? How expensive is it? You can think of some of the costs that might be associated with various disability needs. The evidence from existing descriptive and qualitative studies suggests that most accommodations for people with psychiatric challenges require little to nothing in direct costs. Now, there may be some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, this is not a high cost in terms of direct costs. What did we learn about typical accommodations? They fell generally into 3 categories. Actually, if you read the whole synthesis, which is very long, there's more like 5 types, but you could roll them into one of these. Task, routine, relationships. Now we see this fellow here who's trying to manage a whole bunch of different things at once. And if somebody's having some cognitive challenges, if somebody has some attention problems, organizational problems, this poor fellow is probably really stressed out and needing a break right away. So we can change the tasks or reorganize the tasks. We can change their routine. Typically, time is one of the issues. And then we can put in the relationships that are necessary to make this work. The research showed the most frequently used accommodations for people with mental health challenges were flexible schedules, job assistance by vocational rehabilitation specialist. That could be someone from a supported employment program, clubhouse program, an employment network person, a job coach, somebody who is invested in making this particular job work right. Interpersonal or other support interactions provided by supervisors and coworkers. That's a really important one, and it's the one that is probably the most powerful because that's where the person is every day. Changes in job tasks and changes in the training process. Those were the most frequently used. What have we learned about the nature of job accommodations? Employees and supervisors tend to identify different accommodations when asked about a particular job, like flexibility in schedules, changing of supervision, type of supervision, and so forth. Relationship accommodation needs were least often met. Least often met.
If I'm not enrolled, how long would I take to get enrolled and see those numbers?
I hear somebody talking in the background. Could that person mute their phone, please? Thank you. Again, what are the other findings? On the left side is the researchers' wording. And we're going to try to explain that a little bit more simply. Lucy is typing something. I'll wait to see what she has to say. We'll be able to print the slides. All right, I'm going to, you can't print them while we're talking, but what I'll tell everybody as we go along is that this presentation is being recorded, and you will be able to access the recording. You will also be able to get the slides and some additional materials. So you'll have everything by tomorrow afternoon, and I'll give you that website where you can find everything. So what do these findings mean? Most of what you'll be asked to do as an employer or a supervisor is to make accommodations that help people think more clearly or in a more focused way and get along with colleagues and supervisors. Telling someone that you have a psychiatric disability is scary. So here's the dilemma. I mentioned this before. If you don't disclose, you don't get the accommodation you might need. If you do disclose, sometimes it results in discriminatory practice. So that's a very personal decision, one that usually the person would talk over with their vocational rehabilitation person or their job coach, whoever is helping them, if they have such a person. When there is a specific program, like supported employment clubhouse, mental health job coach, etc., the issue of identifying oneself or not is usually taken care of from the beginning. So basically, you know, if you come in through a program, you're automatically disclosing that you have a disability. You don't have to say what it is or give a diagnosis, but you have to tell what your functioning problem is. So I mentioned before that we're focused on functioning, not on symptoms. Although we try to work closely with clinicians who may be dealing with the symptoms and trying to minimize the stress that people are having on the job. That's, you know, a lot of what these accommodations are about, is trying to minimize the stress. Examples of limitations that are helped by accommodations. I have bolded these in red because these are the accommodations that people most need in most situations. It can be an individual difference, but most of the time, these are the kinds of things that people are needing help with. First of all, cognitive, learning the job tasks, concentrating, memory issues, working independently, and so forth. Social and interpersonal. What do I do at lunchtime or on breaks? What is the culture of this company? Do I go sit in a lunchroom with everybody else? If everyone else eats at their desk, what do I do? What do I eat? Where do I eat? How do I interact with people? When I need something from them? These are the kinds of things that people often need some help with. There may be emotional or physical, stamina kinds of issues as well. But the first two are the most frequent, according to the research. What have we learned about disclosure and accommodation? People with mental health challenges, in contrast to those who might have a sensory impairment, are less likely to have accommodations in the workplace. And I believe the number is 50% less likely. So a person with a different kind of disability, like a physical disability or a sensory disability, are 50% more likely to have an accommodation than a person with a mental health kind of hidden disability. The supervisor and coworker supportiveness are associated with disclosure and successful accommodations in the workplace. So this is kind of saying that where the supervisor and coworker support is there, things work better. This is an interesting one. Over-accommodation or excessive supportiveness may result in employees leaving jobs due to feeling unchallenged and overprotected in their work. So if somebody feels like they're kind of being dummied down, so to speak, we have a big initiative in the mental health field now to help, as in substance abuse world, to help people in recovery to work in the mental health field. And there are many more opportunities now for them to do that, to try to change the system, make it more recovery oriented. But not everybody knows how to use the peers who are working in a mental health system. And sometimes they end up shredding papers or doing things that are unrelated to their expertise. So, and I also want to comment in a period of time when I was actively doing job development, one of my problems was that the employers were too nice to the person. They weren't able to set limits or tell them if something is out of whack. Somebody's making comments that are inappropriate. They're afraid to tell them, and the next thing I know, the person's fired, when we had missed the opportunity to intervene with that person and help them, learn what's rightful behavior. Attitudes about accommodations. Employers tend to be aware of the ADA, and they tend to understand that it applies to people with mental health problems. The majority of employers were satisfied with the employees that they did have. I'm going to stop here for a second and say that I'm almost finished with my presentation, so if anyone has questions, now would be a good time to start typing them into that little box. Okay. Coworkers are generally supportive of job accommodations for people with psychiatric challenges, like flexible work hours, banking overtime for use of sick leave, access to counseling, and other things. I mean, I won't say that's 100%, but the research does say that they are generally supportive of the accommodations. Why do we want to promote new research on job accommodations? What do we know about that need? We know that the unemployment and underemployment rates among those with mental health conditions are extremely high. I will say we're still in the area of 75 to 85% unemployment for people with mental health challenges. That's huge. And every study that's ever been done about whether people want to work, that always says the same thing. The vast majority of people want to work, but the supports and the skills training that they need to make it successful isn't there in sufficient quantity. So it's an extremely important issue to make sure that people have these supports. The other thing is that work is such a powerful way to accelerate somebody's recovery. I mean, we just see enormous differences when people begin to work in their grooming and their attitude and their self-confidence. So it's just extremely important that we support people in their efforts to be successful at work. We need more rigorous research. As mentioned earlier, there are a lot of studies, but some of them could be a bit more accepted in the field if they had a more scientific approach. We know from supported housing, supported employment, supported socialization, all these initiatives, that when people have the right supports, that the outcomes are very positive. That sort of concludes my piece of this presentation. I refer you to the entire body of work that was done on this research initiative is at this website. And it's called the Disability Research Right to Know is the name of the website. And then you go to psychiatric disabilities. And the very first one is job accommodations. And there you will see the entire study with all the references, etc. And finally, tomorrow we will be posting this seminar, the slides, a fact sheet, and some scenarios for employers. And I'll conclude with a saying from Tom Hanks from A League of Our Own: if it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. It's hard, and that's what makes it great. So we can give these presentations, but we know in the real world that this is something that needs to be watered and tended every single day to make it successful. Okay, now I'm going to look at some of the questions, and I'll get to as many as I can in the next 7 minutes. So I'm going to slide this up a little bit here, starting with Jennifer Bagley. Do you have suggestions and resources for finding mental health job coaches? I'm not sure if you mean that you're trying to recruit them themselves or you're trying to find them for people, for employees or prospective employees. But I would have suggestions, and what I might do is put those suggestions on the website because it's sort of a long answer. It depends kind of on what benefits people are on. It depends on whether they have established eligibility for mental health services in their area from the public mental health system. There are a number of variables there, but I do have some suggestions, and what I will do is I will put them on the website for tomorrow, if that's okay with you. I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I'm just trying to conserve time so I can get to another question. But yes, I have some suggestions about that. Larry Robin, there was research from the University of Virginia years ago that showed that consumers with long work histories that had to disclose due to disability or job changes suffered from a lack of advancement even after having a successful career. Yes, you're pointing out a big dilemma. And I would generally say the advice that we give people is that, first of all, it's up to you individually. It's up to the person to make that decision. If you really need an accommodation in order to make it work, and sometimes they don't know that they need an accommodation until they start to work, but if an accommodation is needed, and if it feels like a supportive environment, your chances would be better off to make the disclosure And again, you don't have to say what your disability is or what your symptoms are or anything. You just have to have certification that you're disabled and what your functioning needs are. If it doesn't necessarily feel like a supportive environment, or if you don't have a need for accommodations, generally speaking, you would be better off not disclosing. Those are gross generalizations. It's really, up to the individual. But yes, I've seen this happen where somebody with a learning disability who had worked in a human service agency for many years disclosed his disability to somebody, and it went downhill from there, and he ended up getting fired, and there was a court case, and it was sort of a bloody mess. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Larry. So I guess what I would say is if a person is in that situation of in a job trying to decide after they got there whether to disclose or not, talk to people who work in vocational rehabilitation or work in supported employment, and really get some good advice before you make that decision. Don't just kind of blurt it out, and definitely don't blurt it out when you're in your first interview. We've had people go in and sort of wear their I am schizophrenic t-shirt on kind of thing, so we want to avoid that. Okay, so Jennifer is clarifying she wants to find them as employees. Okay, not the question I thought you were asking. I think I'm going to take that question outside of the webinar and check with a couple colleagues about that and see if I can get back to you. I thought you were asking a different question. Okay. Larry, Lisa is asking, can you give accommodation examples that alleviate stress in the workplace? I actually, Melanie is going to be doing that in her presentation. She has some nice examples. But here's my spin on that question. They suggest for people who have physical disabilities or older people that you have handlebars on your bathtub. Now, I say that everyone can benefit from handlebars on the bathtub. So typically, things that are helpful to people with disabilities, things that are helpful to people with mental health problems in the workplace, not always, but often end up being helpful to everybody. The materials you're going to get on the website tomorrow, there's an example in there of a fellow who works in a museum, and it's a variation on a true story that I know. And in his case, he was very stressed out by sort of the way the tasks were organized. They were very disorganized. The departments were making things worse. And so he asked to have the tasks for himself set up in a different way. And when they looked at that, they realized that the whole museum was kind of disorganized. And based on his recommendations, they reorganized the whole thing. And even today, they're one of our best employers. So the examples I would be is a good job description, supportive supervision, some flexibility in time. So those are things that help everybody. And they become extremely important for people with mental health issues. I don't know if I answered your question, but I have about one more minute here. What can supervisors do to help someone who doesn't disclose but is obviously having mental health challenges? Had that very thing happen recently. If their mental health problems are affecting their work in any way, either their coming to work, their work performance, in a way you deal with them as you would any other employee and say, gee, I've noticed that you were coming into work late, or I've noticed that you've had trouble concentrating, and try to work with them that they are having issues in, Excuse me, somebody has their phone unmuted and we're getting a lot of background noise.
Yeah.
If people could
They need to figure out
close their phones,
muffled. And that's what that is.
please turn your phone to mute. Thank you very much. If you could do that so we don't get the background noise. Okay. In terms of person not acknowledging they're having mental health problems, if you have an employee assistance program, you might ask them for help or advice. You might suggest the person try that service. Yes, he's...
That's how she gets catered to, bad. So when they want something,
Somebody is talking in the background and we need you to mute your phone. Thank you. Okay, great. So I would say work with the person around the focus being on their work performance and functioning, any changes that you've noticed,
be good.
and stay away from trying to be a counselor and trying to find out what it is that's bothering them, because people may feel very intruded if you do that.
Call me back.
But just try to work with them around their performance and how they may be experiencing stress, and are they having a lot of stress. Don't ask them what the stress is, because again, they might feel intruded. But so that's, I guess, how I would deal with it. Melanie might have some suggestions when she comes on. The rest of the questions, I think, Richard points out, we don't say, so she is a schizophrenic. We say a person who has schizophrenia, or we say a person who has a mental health condition. It's a lot less stigmatizing to use that language. Thank you, Richard. So at this point in time, I am going to turn it over to Melanie, who is our colleague from the Job Accommodation Network. Before I do that, I'd like to ask everyone to please turn off their audio, because we're getting background noise. Thank you very much. And if we have time at the end, we'll take some more questions. Okay, Melanie, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, thank you, Joan. There we go. We're just going to give you a quick overview of what we do at JAN for those who aren't familiar. JAN was established in 1983 as a free national service. We continue to function that way today. We specialize in job accommodations and employment provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Consultants can assist callers at any point in the interactive process, from explaining what the process includes to helping pinpoint and solve difficulties at specific steps. We can also answer specific questions and give targeted technical assistance, as well as provide comprehensive resources. All calls are completely confidential, so that the callers are free to explore their options and don't have to worry about information leaks or anything. Okay. There are numerous ways to communicate with JAN. You can call, you can do chat, you can text, there's TTY, relay, email, Skype, and you can use social networks. So there's really no reason not to get a hold of JAN. We offer live and archived training like we're doing right now. And then we also work as your partner in the employment and retention of employees with disabilities, and we can help employers become model employers. All right, we're just going to talk today about mental health impairments and the job accommodations that are most common for those. And
Melanie, you're being asked to turn your volume up. Thank you.
Okay.
You can.
All right.
Okay? Okay.
All right. All right, this is how NAMI defines a mental health impairment. It's a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning. Just as diabetes is a disorder of the pancreas, mental health impairments are medical conditions that often result in a diminished capacity for coping with the ordinary demands of life. All right. Common mental health impairments that we hear about here at Jan would be anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and seasonal affective disorder or SAD. And the common limitations for the health impairments, and we say that a lot of times the limitations are more important than the diagnosis because that's where the issues are in the limitations, and that's what the accommodations address. And so we look at those limitations. Those include attendance, concentration, emotions, fatigue, memory, organization, panic attacks, sleep disturbances, stress, coworker interaction, and working effectively. All right. Mental health impairments can affect persons of any age, race, religion, or income. For many people with mental health impairments, the stigma can be worse than the condition, and therefore, mental health impairments are often revealed in the workplace only when a crisis occurs. And we didn't provide statistics there because they vary so much. One of the points I did want to make about under the ADA is that there's no list of medical conditions that qualify as disabilities, but there will be some impairments that virtually always constitute a disability. And these are the mental health impairments that will virtually always constitute a disability. And those are major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, a PTSD, OCD, and schizophrenia, because these conditions substantially limit brain function. All right, now we're going to get into the job accommodation part. We're going to talk first about productivity. And I did want to say, Joan had sort of referred to this, that an employer can have the same production standards for employees with disabilities as they have for any other employee. The difference would be that they just may need to accommodate the employee with a disability to help them meet that standard. All right, we're going to start here with an example of a production manager for a large manufacturer who had bipolar disorder. His duties included working 40 hours per week with additional overtime to complete and oversee paperwork and shipping orders. He was not meeting his production standards. All right, let's look at some accommodation ideas here for concentration, and these are some ideas to help reduce distractions in the work area. Those include space enclosures like cubicles, sound absorption panels, or a private office if that's possible, white noise, music player, or environmental sound machines. Some people say that they like to work with like one earbud in, and that gives them enough music to help them concentrate with the other still being able to hear what's going on. Uninterrupted off time is very helpful to people where they can complete tasks without interruptions if that's possible. Sometimes so many hours per week or maybe so many minutes per day would be helpful. And then desk organizers. That could mean a lot of different things depending on what your job is, but that can be very helpful to keep your desk organized. Here's some more ideas. Increase natural lighting or provide full spectrum lighting. Research shows that we are more productive and more alert when we have better lighting, so that's an idea. Divide large assignments into smaller tasks and goals, or you can take similar assignments and chunk them together so that they make a little bit more sense. Use auditory or written cues as appropriate. Restructure the job to only include essential functions, and that allows more time then to complete those without the marginal functions in there. Providing memory aids such as schedulers, calendars, email add-ons, or apps. The thing there to make sure of is that the individual knows how to use them. There may be some training that might need to be involved. All right, let's see how this accommodation worked out. It says initially the employee, and that was the manager, was allowed to work 30 hours per week for 1 month, increasing to 40 hours per week for the next month. Then the manager returned back to his regular schedule. He was also provided a work area that was away from the noise and given earbuds to listen to music. He also met with a supervisor once a week to discuss workload issues. All right, here we have another example of a housekeeper with OCD who repeatedly checked and rechecked rooms for supplies. She was not completing the number of rooms required during a shift. All right, let's look at some accommodation ideas here for organization. And that can be to use daily, weekly, monthly task lists, use a calendar with automated reminders to highlight meetings and deadlines, divide large assignments into smaller tasks and goals, use a color coding scheme to prioritize tasks. That can be very helpful. If you're going to do that, you just want to make sure you're using the same colors throughout, like just maybe like 3, like red, green, and yellow, like a stoplight. That seems to work well. The use of electronic organizers and mobile devices or apps can be very helpful with organization. But again, we just need to make sure that the people using those know how to do that. The accommodation here was that the housekeeper was accommodated with a computerized checklist for each supply listed for each type of room. And that way she knew what she needed to do. All right. We have another example here of a customer service representative with arthritis and major depression who experienced extreme fatigue during the afternoon, which had an effect on her speed. All right, here's some accommodation ideas for fatigue. To allow a flexible work environment. And that can mean a lot of things. That can mean times you come in the morning. It could mean break times, lunch times, flexible assignments. Provide a goal-oriented workload. Reduce or eliminate physical exertion and workplace stress. One question would be, does the person have to walk a distance to use a copier or a printer or a fax machine? Could one be located closer? Implement ergonomic workstation design, and that would be evaluated individually, what each person would need for the type of position they have and what their work tasks are. And then to regulate temperature and lighting. If that can be done individually, where each person can control their own, maybe if they're in an office, they can do that. That can be helpful for fatigue as well. Now, this customer service rep was accommodated with a wireless headset, articulating keyboard tray, and an ergonomic keyboard. Now, I don't know if any of you use a headset. If you use a phone and you have to put it in your shoulder and hold your head up, you can get kinks in your neck, and that can be very uncomfortable. But with a wireless headset, you can get up and move, and that really frees you up to do other things and cause less aches and pains. All right, here we have an example of a grocery store bagger with seasonal affective disorder who had difficulty working an early schedule due to oversleeping. She also experienced fatigue and depression during late fall and winter months. As a result, her attendance was erratic. All right, here we have some accommodation ideas for sleep disturbances. The first one there is allow for a flexible start time, if possible. Some jobs allow for this very easily. Some jobs don't. For instance, a teacher, kind of has to be at work on time.
Yeah.
They're going to be there. But there are a lot of jobs where the starting time can be flexible. Combine scheduled short breaks into one longer break, so maybe somebody could have a rest or a nap. Provide a place for the employee to rest during a break. Allow the employee to work one consistent schedule, and that way they can have a more consistent sleep schedule. And the last one would be to provide work areas with natural lighting. And like I said before, that there's increased productivity and alertness in people where there's more natural lighting, so that's always a good thing. All right. The bagger was accommodated with an afternoon schedule and was moved to the front of the store, which had windows that let sunlight enter her workspace. And as Joan was saying, a lot of these accommodations are little cost or no cost, and certainly changing a schedule is going to be no cost. Moving somebody's workstation may involve a little bit of cost. All right, now we're going to talk about some conduct issues, and the same goes for conduct as performance. What I had said before, that an employer can expect all employees to meet a certain conduct standard, even employees with a disability The only difference would be there that they would need to look at how can we accommodate this person to meet that conduct standard, if meeting that standard was a difficulty because of a disability. Okay, we're going to look at the first example here is an electronic engineering technician with bipolar disorder had difficulty managing his emotions while experiencing the side effects of periodic prescription changes. So here are some accommodation ideas for emotions. And let me say that these accommodation ideas here are some common ones. That doesn't mean these are going to work for everyone, and it doesn't mean everybody would need all of these, and there may be some that we don't have on here that would work for someone. And, we look at each case individually, and so if you have any questions or you need help with something, please give us a call and we can help you with that. Encourage the use of stress management techniques to deal with frustration, and maybe a place to be able to do those stress relief techniques. Allow telephone calls during work hours to doctors and others for needed support. Allow the presence of a support animal. Allow flexible breaks. And that can mean a lot of things. That can mean having more breaks that are shorter in length, or it can mean combining breaks to make one longer one, add it to the lunchtime. And as Joan had said, refer to EAP. That's the Employee Assistance Program. That's always a good thing. All right. The accommodation is that the engineer technician was accommodated with a more flexible schedule and allowed to take breaks to call his counselor when he was experiencing heightened emotions. And, a schedule of breaks can be as flexible as the job can allow it, and it can be different for different people. That's a common accommodation. Here's another example. Is a claims adjuster with social anxiety was experiencing problems with interacting with the public. As a result, he said inappropriate things to clients. And here we have some accommodation ideas for working effectively. And the first one there is to develop clear expectations of responsibilities and the consequences of not meeting performance standards in concrete language so that everyone is aware of what they need to do. And those need to be across the board for everybody. It needs to be consistent. Schedule consistent meetings with the employee to set goals and review progress. And the third one there, allow for open communication. This is always a great practice, and I think this is what makes the accommodation process successful, or can cause it to be a little less successful, is when there's not open communication. There should be communication at all points to check back and see if accommodations are working, if they need tweaked, or if something's not working, let's not waste time on it, let's look about something else. And then to establish written long-term and short-term goals. All right, for the accommodation, the claims adjuster was given a temporary work schedule change to part-time for 2 weeks to attend the outpatient services he needed. He returned full-time to a later shift when one became available, with flexible scheduling to attend his counseling appointments. Now, how this says he returned to a later shift when one became available. Under the ADA, you never have to create a position, you never have to bump somebody else out of their position. And so somebody may have to wait to get a different shift if that's something that would work for them. Here's an example of a real estate appraiser with migraine headaches and post-traumatic stress disorder who became very stressed when her work environment was noisy. She became angry and was insubordinate to her supervisor. So here are some accommodation ideas for managing stress. Refer to counseling and the Employee Assistance Program. Allow telephone calls during work hours to doctors and others for needed support. Allow the presence of a support animal. Allow flexible work environment, which we've talked about before, flexible scheduling, modified break schedule, leave for counseling, and work from home or flexi-place. And a lot of times people can work from home even part-time, several days a week. Some people can't handle a whole day at work, but they can do like several hours at home, and then that enables them to come into work. Job allows, that can be a really good accommodation. And the last one there is to modify environmental triggers, and that involves communication, to find out what those triggers are. If somebody has people coming into their office all the time to ask them questions and that causes them stress, let's look at a way to stop that. Could people ask questions by email or some way like that? Okay, the accommodation here was the appraiser was given a headset to help reduce noise in her environment. She was also given a light dimmer to control her workstation lighting and help her with light sensitivity. She was also given time off or leave for when she gets migraines. All right, now here we have job performance. Here's an example of an electrician with severe depression who needed to attend periodic licensure training and had difficulty taking effective notes and remembering information in the meetings. All right, here we have some accommodation ideas for memory, to allow the use of a job coach or to provide a mentor, somebody the person works with maybe, that could be a big help. Use auditory or written cues. Additional training time. That could be extended training, retraining only in maybe in certain areas. Provide checklists. Use a color coding scheme to prioritize tasks. Use notebooks, planners, sticky notes, and apps to record information. And just a warning with that one is if you don't want to use too many, because then that can cause a problem and you don't come in your office and you have all these sticky notes and you don't know where to start. Provide labels or a bulletin board to assist in look items, and then to provide minutes of meetings and trainings. There are also apps that record, or sometimes a person will use a digital recorder to record the meetings, and then that way, or instructions. If someone's given verbal instructions on what to do, that's a good thing to record, and then the person can listen to that several times if they need to. Okay. The electrician was accommodated with notes from a remote communication access real-time translation or CART service. Now, this is what the employer decided to do. There are other accommodations for that one as well. Notes could be provided by someone else in the meeting as long as those are complete, good notes, or like we said, to use a recorder. Okay, here's an example of a woodworker carpenter with a panic disorder who experienced recurrent panic attacks when traveling during peak traffic times. He was required to pick up and order supplies when necessary. All right, here we're going to look at some accommodation ideas for panic attacks. Allow the employee to take a break and go to a place where he or she feels comfortable, to use relaxation techniques, or to contact a support person. And sometimes people will ask us that, I'm in a meeting or I'm in an enclosed environment and something happens and I need to get out in a hurry. And maybe there can be some type of a signal that the supervisor is aware of so that the person can get out in a hurry. Identify and reduce environmental triggers such as particular smells or noises, and then to allow the presence of a support animal. The accommodation here for the carpenter was that he was accommodated with a schedule that gave him the opportunity to drop off materials when coming to work in the morning. Here's another example of an attorney with depression who experienced memory deficits due to medication, affecting his ability to recall actions and activities during depositions. The attorney became frustrated and continued to miss and reschedule meetings. All right, here are some accommodation ideas for attendance to allow flexible work environment. We've talked about all that before, flexible scheduling, breaks, leave for counseling, working from home, and then also to modify environmental triggers.
Melanie, what does flexi-place mean? Somebody asking.
Oh, okay, flexi-place is just a flexible schedule where they're allowed to work. That's for the federal government, where they're allowed to work from home and schedule different hours. It involves working around like their core hours. I guess a flexible schedule would just be a better word for that. Okay. Here is the accommodation for the attorney. He was given an alternate site to take depositions. He was moved to a smaller conference room with natural lighting that was away from office noise. Okay, here's our Jan contact information, and this is all on our homepage, on our website too. I don't know if you all have looked at that. The first two phone numbers there, and then our website is askjan.org. And then the Jan at askjan.org is email where you could send questions. And then we have the numbers there for the text and for the Skype. And you can get on the home page and find out how to do the chat. Or you can call and ask whatever questions you need. And over here on this side are the lists of the social networks as well. And that pretty much wraps up the part.
Thank you, Melanie. There's a couple questions here for you.
Okay, sure.
Can you see them?
Yes. Having instructions in writing as opposed to verbally or vice versa be considered a reasonable accommodation. Absolutely, and that depends on what the person's preference is. There are people who get intimidated by a supervisor and don't want them giving them verbal directions, and so having them in an email is good. People with memory issues might want them in an email so that they can check back to that to help them remember. There are people with reading difficulties too who prefer not to have them written but to have them given verbally. So absolutely, that can be an accommodation. Okay, it says here, you have recommended a support animal as an accommodation. Department of Justice has specified support animals, service animals, an animal that actually performs a task. This appears to be conflicting info. Please explain. Okay, well, service animal questions are some of our favorite ones here, Jan, because where there's no real position on that in the workplace. I understand what you're saying about the Department of Justice. What it comes down to is the employer wants to decide how to do that as an accommodation. And that depends on what the person's needs are, what the environment is, what kind of, how the animal behaves. And so we recommend that the employer be open to different situations and to look at, is this an accommodation need that we can meet, and go from there.
I'd like to comment on this. We're a very doggy-loving center, and we have one of our instructors has 2 service animals that she brings in, not for herself, but for the people who come here for services, and they're trained for that, not for the individual. But we have another staff member here who was having a lot of anxiety about getting to work, was having trouble getting here on time, and she requested to have a dog with her. And initially they said no, but then they came back and they said, well, if the dog is trained and certified as a service animal, we'll allow it. So they let her keep the dog during his training period, and she just got her certificate this week. So we're very used to having this little girl around, and it's made a huge difference. And the staff person is here on time all the time, and so it was just the employer, in this case our center, deciding that was a good thing for her. We only have time for probably one more question, and then the rest we're going to have to take and put on the website. So, Melanie, you pick the question.
Okay. Have you heard about sensory kits for coping and calming? No, I haven't heard about sensory kits for coping and calming. Can certainly ask information about that.
We're familiar with them because they're being used in hospitals, mental health hospitals, and facilities where they're trying to eliminate seclusion and restraint, and that's one of the things they do is they have these sensory carts, and they have a special room that's a pleasant room designed by the people in recovery, and they have these carts, and occupational therapists go around and help people to calm down using them. So we'll see if we can find some more information. put that on the website as well. And we are just about out of time. Do you have some final comments, Melanie?
Well, I noticed one question there about building with no pets. Well, under the ADA, there's it's called a modified workplace policy, which means an employer can change a policy for someone with a disability that they don't change for others, and that can mean a lot of different.
Yeah.
And so that would need to be looked at too in a building where no pets are allowed, because a service animal is not considered a pet.
Right. And I just wanted to also remind people that the Job Accommodation Network not only is helpful for employers, but prospective workers can call, current workers can call, family members can call, rehabilitation professionals can call. It's extremely helpful to people from all different segments of the community.
Right.
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 He says mental health conditions are not obvious. Yeah, most of the time they're not. And as we learn more and more about what helps people recover, those functional problems and symptoms become less and less. So they're not obvious, and that makes it in some ways better, in some ways more difficult, because people think if you look the same as everybody else, why don't you act the same as everybody else? And why are you down in the dumps? And why don't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Those kinds of things. So, well, I thank everyone for your patience dealing with our technology here. And I'm glad you all made it into the meeting room. And those